Here in the first session, Professor Nick Burns, career diplomat, now professor at the Kennedy School, who heads the program on the future of diplomacy and co-chair of the event, and my colleague and friend, Professor Bob Mnookin, professor at Harvard Law School, and who is the chair of the program on negotiation. And the three of us will be dealing with these two questions. I simply don't need to introduce Secretary James Baker. He got a lovely introduction before. So as we launch into these cases, which I think you've noticed are very closely linked. German reunification, the final act was signed in Moscow in September, immediately following Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait on August 2nd. When President Bush declared the war aims accomplished in February, it was scarcely a week before Secretary Baker and his team were back in the Middle East on the road that would lead to the Madrid Peace Conference, really the first meeting of Arabs and Israelis face-to-face in a multilateral conference. So these are linked in time, and they're linked by personalities, and they're linked in policy. They're not separate. Before we get into some of the negotiation and diplomatic insights, I'd love to turn to Secretary Baker and ask if you could give us your sort of big picture view of the Gulf War and kind of how we should understand it at 50,000-foot view, and then we'll delve into some specifics.
Okay, I'll be glad to, Jim. Let me first add to something I said this morning. I told us, earlier this afternoon, I told a story about how I was in Siberia negotiating arms control with the Soviet foreign minister when Iraq invaded Kuwait, and how I'd gotten a message from the State Department saying things look bad, you might want to check with your interlocutor there. We're worried about whether Iraq's going to invade Kuwait, and he said no, Saddam would not be that foolish. I said, you better go back and check with the KGB. CIA says we got a lot of troops massing on the border of Kuwait. He went back, checked, he said, he would not be that foolish. Those troops may be there, but they're only looking perhaps at a little disputed strip up there of oil territory. And then I said that we ended up meeting, standing shoulder to shoulder in an airport in Moscow the next day, condemning that move by Iraq, the Soviet client state. I've always said that to me was a clear marker for the end of the Cold War. What I neglected to say was the reason Shevardnadze agreed to do that and stand there with the American Secretary of State and condemn their own client state without ever clearing it with Gorbachev is because he was so embarrassed about the fact that the KGB had advised him wrongly, and he had twice given me bum advice, and he was embarrassed about that. And that's why we got him to stand up and condemn Iraq and agree to an arms embargo. Okay, big picture on the Gulf War. This was a clear case of unprovoked aggression by a big state against a small state. It was also something that had the potential of adversely affecting American national interest. I've been in 3 administrations, and in every one of those we had as a policy, written down as a policy, that we would go to war to protect the energy reserves of the Persian Gulf because our economy depended upon it. Here we were, the 4th largest army in the world marches on its smaller neighbor. It's positioned there on the Arabian Peninsula, and it's not something that we could permit to stand. And in fact, President Bush, one of his first statements was, "This will not stand, this aggression against Kuwait." Nobody parsed that statement at the time to figure out exactly what it meant. Did it mean political and diplomatic and economic sanction? Did it mean war, military, and so forth? But he was clear about it. We were not going to let that continue. And as a matter of fact, Saddam was in a position, had he wanted to do so, to march all the way down the Arabian Peninsula. He could have gone right through Saudi Arabia, and we're fortunate that he didn't. President Bush responded fairly rapidly. We sent troops. After getting permission from King Fahd of Saudi Arabia, we sent troops to the region. This was the first post-Cold War threat to global peace. And it was something that we felt we had to respond to. We had a lot of toing and froing, and we'll talk about this later perhaps, about how we should do that. And whether we should go to the United Nations to get a resolution of the UN Security Council. A lot of people didn't think we should do that. The Secretary of Defense didn't think we should do it. The Prime Minister of the UK didn't think we should do it. And we debated that quite a bit, up one side and down the other. We ended up going to the Security Council. We waited, of course, until the United States was in the chair. We did it at the level of foreign ministers. I was the foreign minister of the United States and in the chair. And so I was in control of whether we would ever bring the issue up for a vote. And we would never have brought the issue up for a vote unless we knew we had the votes to succeed. I said in the earlier session, one of the things that I think helped me as Secretary of State was that I had run 5 presidential campaigns. And I knew the value of political credibility and political currency. And we all recognize that if we went for a resolution and didn't get it, we'd be worse off than if we hadn't gone for it. So we were never going to go for that resolution unless we knew we had the votes. Second thing we were never going to do was negotiate down from the resolution we did get. We got a resolution out of the Security Council that said, Iraq, leave Kuwait. If you don't get out, we're going to force you out. And you do so unconditionally. The Iraqis and the Soviets as well kept coming to us and saying, you got to give Saddam something to save face, to let him have something so he'll leave. And we said, wait a minute. When you go through the UN Security Council and they exercise their Chapter 7 responsibilities for the first time in history, you don't negotiate down from that. So these are some of the things that happened. This is the first and only time that the UN Security Council has used its Chapter 7 powers against a member state, the use of force against a member state of the UN. And what we did was we got a resolution that said we were entitled to use all necessary means to kick Iraq out of Kuwait unconditionally. I said it's the only time it's ever happened. It happened in the Korean War when we got a resolution, but the Soviets had walked out. But we did this with Soviet concurrence. And one of the biggest negotiating tasks I had during this time was to keep China from vetoing. And we finally got China to agree to abstain. We got our resolution 12-4, 2 against Cuba and Yemen, and 1 abstention, China. And it's the only time, as I say, that it's ever happened in the history of the United Nations. Now, President Bush 43 went to the UN before he went into Iraq in 2003, and he got a 15-0 resolution out of the Security Council. But all it said was, if Saddam doesn't provide us with certain information or do certain things, there will be serious consequences. And Tony Blair needed a second resolution to satisfy his political constraints at home, so he asked us to go for a second resolution. President Bush did. We didn't have the votes. We went for it, and we couldn't get it. And I've always said I think that was a mistake to go for that resolution without knowing that we had the votes to get it. So that's one of the things that led to all of the difficulties in the second Iraq war between the United States and China, and United States and France, and the United States and some other countries. Now, there are a lot more things we need to talk about, but